Well, if you're thinking about selling your home, figuring out what it's actually worth can be tricky, especially as the market starts to give buyers a little more negotiating power. And while you may have an idea of what you want your home to sell for, that number may not always match what buyers are willing to pay. So how do you determine the right price, and what can you do to make sure you're getting the most value out of your home? Joining us today is Realtor Alana Grant to help us break it all down. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
So first off, I want to start with talking about comparables. What exactly is that?
Okay, so agents will, as soon as you call them and say, I want to list my house, the first thing an agent will say is, okay, I need to do a comparative market analysis, or a CMA. In that, what they do is they research what the comparable sales are in your neighborhood. Now, sometimes agents will go outside of the neighborhood. I've seen people use comparable sales anywhere from a half a mile to 3 miles outside of your home, but it's very much so flexible on what they can use. My recommendation is always the closer the better, and what we do is we look at homes that are similar to yours. And so we look, if you have a 4-bed, 3-bath brick house, we're looking for 4-bed, 3-bath brick houses within a certain mile radius of your home.
So let me ask you this. So let's just say if in your neighborhood, your neighbor's home sells for like $400,000, does that necessarily mean your home is worth $400,000?
Not quite. So it depends on a lot of things, but primarily the specs, where it would appraise, when it sold for $400,000, because timing is very key in qualifying a comparable sale. Some people will look back at the market from 2 or 3 years ago and say, oh yeah, when my neighbor sold their house for $400,000, it sold quickly. But if you try to sell that same house today, it could or could not sell quickly because the nature of the market is different. And so the time frame is another thing that I would consider when you are trying to determine what a comparable sale is. And the reason that you want to do that is because you don't want your house overpriced or underpriced. And so you want to make sure that you have a professional who can go into our systems and make that research-based analysis on what your home is worth.
And how far back should homeowners look at recent sales when they're trying to get an idea of their current home value?
I would recommend a year. I wouldn't try to go too much further than a year. However, some neighborhoods that are really established may not have a ton of recent sales, and sometimes you have a little bit more flexibility on going, maybe outside the neighborhood or going back a little further than a year.
And I want to talk about condition. When we talk about condition, how can the condition of a home kind of either increase or decrease the value of someone's home?
So I divide condition up into 2 major categories. The first is maintenance, and the second is upgrades. And so when it comes to maintenance, it's not necessarily a determining value for maybe an appraiser. However, for a buyer, when they come into the home, if it looks like, no one ever walked on these floors, if it looks like this is a fresh coat of paint, if it looks like you have really taken care of the home and you can produce receipts from how many times you had your HVAC serviced, or the last time you got your roof checked, if you can produce that kind of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Receipts.
Yes, so you can reduce those receipts, then that makes a buyer feel a little bit more confident that the home has been maintained well. And while it may not do too much for your appraised value, it could do a lot for how a buyer perceives the value of your home. And then outside of that, you have upgrades. Now, upgrades can go into the appraised value of a home. And so when I recommend, making upgrades, we look at kitchen countertops, we look at windows, we look at those more structural things that go into a home. But then you also want to do things that make the house look pretty, because you want it to be appealing to anybody who walks into the home.
And when you're getting ready to sell, what are some repairs or improvements you should consider before putting your home on the market?
So I recommend doing pre-inspections. Some folks are with it, some are not, because they don't want to spend the money. But when you do a pre-inspection, you can have an inspector to come in and check the main things that will concern a buyer when they have their home inspection. Those are all things plumbing, electrical, HVAC, and roof. I recommend just going ahead and fixing those things before someone comes in. On the other side of like just the visual aesthetic, I always recommend a deep clean and a fresh coat of paint.
We love a deep clean.
Yes, we do.
Now, when we talk about appraisals, how is an appraisal different from what the real estate agent recommends listing a home for?
Such a good question. And so the appraisal normally happens in the middle of a transaction. The appraisal is ordered by the buyer's lender. Now, this is if they're using, a mortgage lender to purchase the home. So what the appraiser does is they come in and protect the interest of their client, the buyer, and the lender. They want to make sure that they are not lending more money to the buyer than what the house is actually worth. And so the appraiser will come in and make many of the considerations that we just discussed and more, and they will determine what the value of the home is. And so the realtor can go through and, they can do their research, the buyer can have their research, and I've done a couple deals, particularly as of late, where everybody had their own opinion of what the home was worth, but the appraiser had the final say in what that house was worth. And so what the appraisal does is that it comes in normally about a week, maybe two before closing. It determines that value, and typically it's negotiable because, in different markets, but in a buyer's market, I would suggest that a seller be ready to go to whatever the appraised value is if it is lower than where you are already contracted.
And my last question, speaking of a buyer's market, what is especially important for a seller to be realistic about when it comes to comparable sales, condition, appraisal, before deciding to list their home?
Don't list your home based off of how you feel. We all believe that our homes are these amazing places, and we want to get as much money out of it as possible, particularly if you're buying another home. You want your net proceed to reach its max. But the best way to get your net proceed to meet your max is to talk to a realtor, have them explain to you what the market conditions are. Don't list it too high. I use the analysis a lot of, or the comparison of the clearance section. When you have clothes that are overpriced too long in the store, what does the retailer do? They mark it down. Right. And so they mark it down so that it will eventually sell. You don't want to be that person who has your home on the market for too long because you've overpriced it, and now if your realtor doesn't recommend that you reduce the price, a buyer will come in and offer you a lower price because they'll think something is wrong with the house without even seeing it because it's overpriced and been on the market too long. And so I always recommend, again, talk to that agent, have them to do a comparable market analysis. Also, hold your breath for the appraisal to make sure that the two align.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Alana, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're obviously going to put this on our website. So if anyone at home would like to get some of these gems that you continue to drop on us weekly, we so much appreciate it when all things real estate. We're going to place this on our website, WLTX.com.